Today's topic is one that is very close to my heart and is one of the biggest problems that couples face today. This is true for both new couples and especially old couples that have been together for a very long time. The single biggest mistake that puts a wedge in a couple's relationship is arguments, specifically unresolved arguments. Hi, I'm Andrew from The Foolish Couple. For decades, all I can remember about my parents are their arguments. Throughout my childhood, I don't think there was actually a single day that my parents did not have a single fight. What they thought about was always something very trivial, but as a kid, I thought that it was normal for couples to argue all the time. The fighting, the arguments, and the bickering never stopped until more than 4 decades later. And that is when my dad's Parkinson's got so bad that we had to put him into a senior assisted living home so that he can get the proper nursing care that he needed. Almost overnight, I noticed that my parents' relationship changed. My dad spent over 10 years in an assisted living home. Every day, my mom would cook some of his favorite dishes, put them into these little small lunch boxes, stuff these boxes into a bag, and then go take the bus for an hour to go visit him. And the times when I was in town, I would take my mom to visit my dad. And what I saw, now that I was in my 40s, was something that I had never seen in the past 40 years of my life. My dad's eyes actually lit up when he saw my mom. They would smile to each other and talk about the news and whatever was happening with the family. There was no arguments and no more bickering. So why am I telling you this story about my parents? I am telling you the story about my parents because it is so important to resolve arguments as soon as they start. Too many couples argue over the most trivial things. Mostly these arguments revolve around their children or finances, but it can also be as trivial as what movie to watch or even which parking space to park at Costco. Recently, I had a lunch with some friends and we were talking about arguments between couples. The conversations were very interesting and sometimes a little heated, but mostly men and I just sat back and listened to everyone's input. The one interesting thing that I noticed was that the men said they would always be the first to say, "I'm sorry," to their wives. More interesting, most women would also agree that the arguments usually started with the men and that their husbands were always the first to say they were sorry. And even more interesting than that is that the women in that table claimed it was really their fault that any of these arguments started. Except one of our dearest girlfriends. What she said was so enlightening, and I hope that all the others at the table caught it too, because it is a lesson that I'm going to be sharing with you today. She said that she never started any of the arguments that they really had with her husband. The reason was ever since the last argument that she was wrong, she owned up to her mistake, explained why it happened, and said she was sorry that the argument happened. She also made sure that she never made the same mistake again that caused that particular argument. This was gold, and I hope every single couple should be doing this. Let me explain what I mean by unresolved arguments. For the men out there, it is not enough to say, "I am sorry," so you can sleep with your wife in the same bed that night. Just because you said you were sorry and you don't actually own up to why it's your fault, that's going to hurt your relationship. The wedge between your relationship will slowly build over time. For the women out there, it is time for you to own up and say sorry when it's your fault. The men do not always start the arguments, and it's not always our fault, and we should not be sorry for something we didn't do. All these unresolved arguments that ended up with just a simple "I'm sorry" is like a boiling pot of water. Eventually the water will pop the lid off and boil out. This is what happens with relationships. All these unresolved arguments lead to bickering over the many years, through decades, like my parents' experience. Worse, it's what your kids experience growing up, thinking that is normal and do the same when they get married and have their own children. It's almost like the circle of life in The Lion King, but it's a vicious circle. So the lesson today is, if you make a mistake that caused an argument, there are 4 things you need to do to resolve it. Number 1 is own up to your mistake. Number 2, explain why you made the mistake. Number 3, what are you going to do so you don't make the same mistake again? And number 4, and it's the most important, then you say you're sorry. Let's stop all the bickering in our lives and concentrate more about the things we love about each other to strengthen our relationships. Our relationships should be getting stronger as time passes by, not getting weaker. Don't wait till it's too late to realize how lucky it is that you have each other, like my parents. Please leave us your thoughts below. Till next time, love what you live and live what you love.